This single event throws the whole high jump exercise into a very curious light because it somehow changed the whole character of Byrd's expedition. And within 48 hours, Admiral Byrd gave orders that canceled the entire expedition and made preparations to leave Antarctica immediately. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the 21 CD podcast. As always, I'm your ghost, John. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you guys want to support the show, and I really hope you do, all you got to do is subscribe and like. I don't really care about anything else. I do have a website, 21cdstudios.com, where you can go to buy merch and find my links to other places and stuff like that. But the most important thing to me is subscribing and liking. And to that point, everybody who ordered merch, it is on your way to you. Obviously, a bunch of you guys know I just got back from an insane trip in South America, and so I was a little behind on orders because I had no way to access any of that stuff, but they are on their way to you. Don't worry. So, obviously, Hollow Earth, that's what we're talking about, right? But I have to give you a background first, and a historical, technical background, the backdrop that we're going to set the stage with. And Admiral Byrd is going to be our main character in this episode. But don't shut the episode off yet because you think you know the story, because I also thought I knew the story. And for years, I've been talking about Admiral Byrd and didn't really understand the whole picture. Apparently, I was so focused on the actual fantastic account of him finding Ariani and talking to the master and learning about this Hollow Earth society or whatever it was. And a lot of flat earthers will come out here now in the comments and they'll say, well, he didn't go inside the earth, he went beyond some ice wall or something and got to some warmer area, whatever it is. Guys, wherever he went, it doesn't matter to me if it's there or down. Like, it doesn't really matter to me, but it's somewhere out there that he allegedly went, right? And then his journal was taken and classified, and he was hush-hushed by the government and sort of discredited and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of the story that you get, right? And so then you're like, oh, so it must be true. Well, it's not really that simple. And that's why I did an insane amount of research. I actually wrote up a 32-page document for this episode. Full-size pages, 12-point script. And I feel like you guys need this history. And so don't get turned off by all the name dropping and all that kind of stuff. The names don't really matter unless you're going to use them to go do your own research, which I think is really important to do. And that's why I include as many of the names and dates and titles of these crafts that we're going to be discussing, because you guys might want to take notes if you're into doing your own research and use those names and dates and titles. It's probably going to change the entire way that you look at Admiral Byrd and the Admiral Byrd story. I'm telling you now, this is not a simple dude who went to Antarctica to see what's there. This was an actual huge deal at the time and should still be considered a huge deal in post-World War II history that just nobody really has ever talked about loudly enough with the proper platform. It's 100% not suppressed, but I would categorize it as hidden history. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Author Rob Arndt, in his book Disc Aircraft on the Third Reich, says that probably the most misunderstood and problematic of all terrestrial-based disc technology lies at the heart of the German disc programs that started with the birth of the Nazi Party in 1920, a full 13 years, by the way, before Adolf Hitler even came to power as the leader of the Third Reich. And to fully comprehend the depth of these programs, it requires the knowledge that above all else, the Nazi Party was founded from the onset, from the beginning, by the occult Thule and Vril societies. and other occult groups, of course, like the Men of the Black Stone, that stretched back to the 20th century with the old German order that you might know as the Order of Teutons or the Teutonic Knights. So, as such, the very first disc project in Germany, built in 1922, was not really considered an aircraft, but actually an interdimensional flight machine in disc form. Okay, the form, that we have originally come to consider or call the quintessential UFO shape, right? Now, when Adolf Hitler, who was a Thule member, by the way, along with Göring and Himmler and various other top Nazi officials, when he became chancellor in Germany in 1933, the 11-year occult metaphysical science of the Thule Vril societies, those occult societies, became strengthened by official state backing for the continued disc development programs, starting with these round aircraft. They were called the Rundflugzeug. They were a series of discs that utilized levitators developed by a guy named W.O. Schumann of the Technical University of Munich, and he worked on these craft for the Nazi Party. And we're going to call these discs the RFZ discs, okay? In 1934, the first RFZ discs were built, which led in 5 short years to 2 massive programs of highly advanced disc aircraft overseen by Himmler's SS, of course. Specifically, though, the SS Technical Branch Unit E4, which was created to explore various alternative energies. Now, this unit was tasked with developing multiple disc designs that utilized the world's first electromagnetic gravity drive systems. And these were called the Triebwerks. And these drives relied on Hans Kohler's free energy converter coupled to a Van de Graaff band generator and Marconi vortex dynamo, which was basically a huge spherical tank of mercury, to create powerful, rotating electromagnetic fields that affected gravity. And the whole point was that these things now should be able to fly faster, be more maneuverable, and don't require a runway to take off. They can just go straight up, okay? Similar to some of our fighter jets now. Wonder where we got that technology. Many have often inquired, why then, when war started in 1939, did Germany not use these advanced and unique machines in air combat? They could have wiped us out. Whoever owns the air in the modern age most likely wins the war. Now, the simple truth lies in the fact that these machines, despite their superior overall performance to conventional piston-engined aircraft and early jets, they couldn't be realistically adapted to any useful military role other than basically the most simple transport and recon work. These strong electromagnetic engines were just too difficult to control at the time, and they could not hope to imitate the flight characteristics of the other high-performance aircraft that were being used on both sides of the conflict at that time. There was very little room for either offensive or defensive armament in these designs, except for a few experimental MG and MK cannons that basically proved impractical in flight. It didn't work. They were having a really hard time putting firearms, missiles, bombs, rockets on these UFOs, these aircraft that they were developing. Furthermore, these devices, for some reason, could only turn at 22.5, 45, and 90 degrees. So their air maneuverability, no matter how fast or how convenient they were, they couldn't really drive these things or use these things for war effectively, okay? But despite all of that, the SS pursued an aggressive policy of theft, forced cooperation, and strong internal development of these types of machines due to the increasing Allied bombing offensive that made conventional aircraft takeoffs on the airstrips highly dangerous. They were losing aircraft to this. So if the SS could develop a production machine that in the future could be armed with cannons and missiles and bombs or even electrostatic weapons, then Germany might be able to turn the war via the air. So the SS went on this huge campaign and they robbed all of Germany's and occupied Europe's patent offices, basically. And people who were found to have aeronautical skill enough to contribute to the SS effort were arrested or coerced into participating in the programs. And among them was a guy named Victor Schauberger, who was in Austria, and another guy named Henry Coanda from Romania. And the SS also used its large slave labor force, because the SS had a huge slave labor force, to assist them in the construction of large underground facilities for these discs to be hidden in and produced in. But the slave labor force that the SS had wasn't big enough for the work that they were conducting. And that right there should be a tip-off that something big was in the works. They requested additional slave laborers from Armaments Minister Albert Speer, and Speer himself was not privy to the projects that the laborers would be used for, because Speer was deliberately kept out of the entire SS disc development programs for security reasons, and the fact that the SS was essentially a state within a state with its own production facilities, its own war material, scientists and technicians, and their own slave labor workforce like we've been talking about, and the knowledge of the secret Third Reich military bases that were key point here, outside of Germany, where these discs were being tested and stored. Among those held, Victor Schauberger became the leader of most interest due to his highly unconventional use of liquid vortex technology, which was perfected while he was in custody. Now, this was originally designed for some sort of like bio-submarine, which itself sounds really interesting. And the strange repulsion discoid motors that he was working on were to be adapted for aircraft. Even though it was for the submarines, they wanted to put them in the aircraft instead. One of Heinkel's own engineers, named Rudolf Schriever, proposed his own sort of craft, and it was called the Flugkreisel, and that utilized conventional jet engines instead of the discoid motor. But his design was kind of taken from him, stolen from him, and handed over to a team of scientists for further study, and the construction of a large flying prototype was produced. And on this prototype, they used a sort of different propulsion method. And at the same time, BMW, the BMW that you know today and was in the past developing Nazi war machines, they began to work on their own UFO craft. Again, they're not UFOs, we're just calling them that for simplicity's sake. And these craft were built on a much smaller scale than the Flugkreisel, so work proceeded basically from 41 to 45, with construction of prototypes beginning in 43, which was arguably the most occult year for the Nazis. And instability was never really solved in these earlier designs, but one disc worked. A BMW Flügelrad 2 V2 seems to have achieved flight in April 1945, close to the end of the year, and this is also important. What does this have to do with the Hollow Earth? We're getting to it. We're getting the backdrop of why Admiral Byrd even had to go to Antarctica in the first place, after the war was over. So these crafts were being developed, and in some of them, flight characteristics were good, but then the SS decided to abruptly drop Schriever's jet fan design in favor of this other guy's version that eliminated the large disc rotor blades that were needed, and they instead swapped them for Schauberger's liquid vortex engine, but on a much bigger scale. So Schauberger was sent back to Austria. They didn't need him anymore in 1944. The SS kind of just let him go. And this other disc took to the air that same year over the Baltic. So towards the end of the year, the Nazis or the end of the war, the Nazis are really developing some actual aircraft that are flying around the world, and nobody appears to know their true characteristics, and they are highly secretive and developed by the SS. So even a lot of Nazi Germany didn't know about the capabilities that the SS had, especially pertaining to these aircraft. And the whole point of this, one of the main points of all of this, by the way, was to develop an aircraft that could just launch from a stationary position without needing a runway. It just went straight up, because the Allied bombing was so intense that Nazi Germany was absolutely being crushed, and their aircraft took too long to get into the air that they were easy targets. And so Nazi Germany needed to somehow solve this. So they needed to get their airplanes off the ground much faster than they were, and without the danger of Allied bombing. So due to this round-the-clock bombing, the SS was forced to try all sorts of drastic measures, including launching unmanned interceptor discs. And these discs were known as the Feuerball weapon, which you might understand to mean fireball. And sometimes these were referred to as the Mystery V7 weapon, of which there never was an official designation. But the Feuerball relied on a rocket motor for launch, a plume sensor for aerial detection, and an electrostatic filed weapon. Because the discs burned chemicals around its ring to create the electrostatic field necessary to disable Allied bomber engines and radar, the object was soon nicknamed, and you guys will recognize this, the Foo Fighter, by the Allies, who cited this fiery halo weapon approaching them by day or night. Okay? The fireballs plagued the 415th NFS from November 44 all the way to April 45, and by that time production had been shifted to the Zeppelin work. Remember the Zeppelins? That nicknamed the larger improved weapon as Ball Lightning, Kugelblitz. The Allies were extremely confused by these weapons, which ranged in size from small to very large and attacked in singles or multiples. The Germans further confused the Allies by launching other weapons along with the Feuerballs, so they never really knew what they were getting. And some of these weapons were called the Seifenblasen, which means soap bubbles. And they were large weather balloons that trailed metal strips and confused radars, okay? And these round shapes reflected in the daylight and gave the appearance of shining globes similar to the Feuerball machines. Are you guys starting to put together a couple things here? We've got orbs, we've got fireballs, we've got spherical craft, manned and unmanned, it appears. These are all things that people report seeing in the sky regularly. Do you guys realize that? What you might actually see sometimes is forbidden Nazi technology that was either stolen or still active. I think we need to start thinking of some of those things in this light, because this is history. This is real stuff. This isn't like I'm out here developing hypotheses. I know a lot of you guys are like, oh yeah, you just diarrhea at the mouth 24/7, but this is actual history here, okay? So the Germans further complicated the identification of these Foo Fighters with a range of smaller spherical aerial probes that were used quite literally as psychological weapons. And these Kugelwaffen, these ball weapons, played aerial games with the Allied bomber gunners that would have, in time, distracted them from the real threat of these larger approaching Kugelblitz discs. That was the strategy. Distract them with these spherical craft that can completely outmaneuver them, just long enough for us to get our Kugelblitz UFOs to come and wipe them all out. That was the strategy of the Nazis with their air warfare. But by the spring of 45, the war was, of course, lost. Regardless, and most of the remaining disc programs were completely halted. Henry Kawanda, who we mentioned in the beginning as being one of the guys who was captured, he was from Romania, if you guys remember, he had been arrested in Paris in 1940 and forced to work on a disc under SS supervision. And his design for a lenticular disc that benefited from his own Kawanda effect was a masterpiece. This was a good one. But because it required 12 Jumo 004 jets to power the huge machine, the project never got past the wind tunnel testing phase. It just required too much power. Then, kind of out of nowhere, these guys named the Horton brothers, who were experts with flying wings, right? And they also studied circular wing designs, but did not actually work on any for Nazi Germany. They instead started working on these designs for the US government post-war in late 1945, 1946, producing what is now believed to be the craft that crashed at Roswell in 1947. The one that they used to make all of us believe in aliens. So the dots are starting to come together. They're starting to connect. In the face of imminent defeat, BMW, of course, destroyed all their Flugelrads, typical. Schriever's Flugelkreisel was also destroyed, and Meath's discs may have been captured as Meath went to Canada post-war to work on some other designs. So, all these guys who developed these discs destroyed all the discs that they had left, allegedly, and sort of just went their own separate ways once they found out that Germany was going to lose the war. Kind of crazy, right? So you've got several parties, including BMW, who were developing what we have come to call UFOs. BMW might still have some of that tech buried in their vaults. Who knows? Okay? But when you see a BMW rolling down the road, just think about that. Those guys were developing what we have come to call UFOs in World War II for the Nazis. That is absolutely crazy. There was one very little known disc project under Heinrich Fleischner that was sort of given the role as the last disc to take off from Berlin in late April 1945. And it was allegedly an official mission, but details of this disc, they called the Devil's Disc, remain clouded in mystery. So that might be a really cool research project for one of you guys. Meanwhile, the Feuerball attacks that stopped in April 45, by the way, in Germany, resumed in late August in 1945 in Japan. So the Feuerballs are now going to Japan and making war there, which it's an obvious technology transfer from Germany to Japan via U-boat. Again, you never hear about this stuff in the history books. The Japanese, however, lacked all the documentation for this weapon and only launched a few of them, and it's said that the Japanese were frightened by this demonic thing and destroyed the remaining Feuerball UFOs by dynamiting them in a pit. Photographic evidence also seems to identify Kugelwaffen sent to Japan, as well as several are seen trailing Sally bombers, probably for flight testing. So we've got these UFOs. When it seems like Germany's losing the war, they send them over to Japan for some reason, and Japan calls these things demonic and bombs them instead of using them or developing the technology. But what we're seeing is a transfer of technology from where? From Germany via U-boat to Japan, which at this point had already been nuked, right? So Japan is basically under the USA's sort of thumb, and that's where some of the UFOs go. Some of the Feuerballs, the Foo Fighters, that's where they go. So you see this transfer of tech. But the Third Reich story ends almost as strangely as it began, right? What about the mysterious Thule Vril discs, which were actually built in smaller numbers? By 1945, there were quite a few of these discs flying around. The Vril had even tested the Vril 8 Odin device and possibly an even more streamlined Vril 9 device. These aircraft were not destroyed, but they were evacuated in March 1945 to areas that were safe from Allied bombing and capture. And these are devices that very, very little is known about, but were cited often enough to be given names. In the year preceding the start of World War II, Germany sent an expedition to Antarctica to scout out a location for a military base there. And the Germans found such a location in the former Queen Maud land, which Germany renamed to Neu Schwabenland. They went to this Neu Schwabenland in Antarctica, and there, in secret, 1942 to 1943, they built a base in the Mühlig-Hoffmann Mountains. And this base has come to be called Base 211, or Station 211. This is a really hot name in the conspiracy world lore, especially in the Nazi world lore. And this base was supplied with slave laborers shipped by sea and U-boats to construct an elaborate cave complex deep within the mountains, allegedly an impregnable fortress. And we see these things in occupied Europe, built by the Nazis. So there's nothing saying that they couldn't do it in Antarctica unless they were developed or unless they discovered some kind of major situation that wouldn't allow them to do that. Hot internal springs were found there. Iron ore deposits were found there. Vegetation and access was achieved primarily, allegedly, through an underwater trench that ran through the area. And some say that they were even able to just bring the submarines right up this trench. During the war, especially the latter part, German U-boats made frequent trips to the South Atlantic, South America, and Antarctica. And Germany also set up floating meteorological buoys in Antarctic waters and weather stations on islands located between Antarctica and the tip of South America. Argentina is one of those places that they think a lot of Nazis ran off to after the war, and we'll get to that as well. So it's interesting that there was a path from Antarctica to the tip of South America that they were utilizing. The SS Rasa und... I can't pronounce it. It's a ridiculous Nazi word. I'm going to mispronounce this ship's name, and I'm just going to call it by a nickname, the SS Russia, which stands for basically Race and Settlement Bureau. They began to take, in 1942, women of Aryan descent from where? Ukraine, solely for the purpose of transporting them to Base 211. This is crazy. This is going to end up being the reason that Admiral Byrd is sent to Antarctica. Without a doubt, this was the mission statement. So the reason that I've given you all of this history, now we're getting to the meat of it, is because this is what was allegedly in Antarctica that the Allied forces had to handle, because they started to realize that maybe the best German tech isn't here. It's actually somewhere else, and there's rumored to be this base, which they've been shuttling people to the entire scope of the war, this entire time. And they've been developing tech, and it's primarily SS. So all of this forces the Allied offensive to at least investigate Antarctica. And Admiral Byrd was sent to do just that task. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. 10,000 women. 10,000 women between the ages of 17 and 24 who were considered blonde and well-proportioned were recruited for this project, along with 2,500 Waffen-SS soldiers serving in Russia. The goal of this massive undertaking was to create a colony at Base 211 suitable for habitation and continued development of the Thule Vril technology. It is believed that both the Thule and Vril societies evacuated that technology from Germany and wherever it was in Europe to Base 211 in Antarctica at Neu Schwabenland at the close of the war under SS General Kammler, okay? And he was in charge of Germany's most secret weapon programs. 2 U-boats that surrendered after the war, where, you might ask? Oh, in Argentina, in South America, are also believed to have carried cargo and high-ranking SS officers to Base 211 in Neu Schwabenland, Antarctica. Remember, there was a route that they regularly used between Antarctica and Argentina, South America. And it became apparent in 1946 that 54, this is important, 54 U-boats and over 6,000 technicians and scientists were simply missing from Germany, and especially from the SS technical branch. That's a lot of people and material just missing from the books, but it gets worse. There were also 40,000 slave laborers and between 142,000 and 250,000 German citizens that were unaccounted for. Despite simply writing these off as probable losses and deaths of the war, Washington, Harry Truman, suspected that a large number of these missing actually escaped to South America and Base 211. Pretty crazy stuff. So now all of a sudden, there's over 250,000 people, and some of the most important people within Nazi Germany, and as well as some of the most important technology missing from recently conquered Nazi Germany. And it's rumored that they are in Antarctica and, of course, South America. But we're talking about Antarctica in this episode. That is a lot of people, guys. So the U.S. then went on a hunt using the war criminal propaganda to cover up the search for technology akin to a South American version of Operation Paperclip. And the United States was so concerned about the secret base that in 1947, with the Antarctic Summer, Operation Highjump was launched with a full military task force headed by Admiral Byrd. Now, we're all caught up. The task was to head straight for Neu Schwabenland and recon the area for a base. If one was found, 4,700 armed troops would have been sent to capture it or destroy it. The task force performed the aerial recon, trailing magnetometers to detect any magnetic anomalies under the ice, but conspicuously, several of Admiral Byrd's planes were actually lost during this mission. The aircraft, allegedly, had run into enemy opposition. This is part of the story that you never learn about Operation Highjump and Admiral Byrd. We're led to believe that he was just some dude with a couple airplanes who went out there and had an amazing experience. We're not led to believe, and yet it is reality, that he was sent here with thousands of troops and dozens of pieces of equipment, flying, driving, whatever, floating, to accomplish the mission of destroying a Nazi base in Antarctica. That was the point. A base that may have up to 250,000 people in it. That is why he went to Antarctica. Operation Highjump was considered a military blunder, by the way. It was considered an operational failure, and Byrd headed back after several weeks, even though he was equipped and ready to spend 8 months there. After a few weeks, I think it was 8 weeks, he was just like, we're getting out of here. We're getting out of here. In his unofficial comments to the South American press, Byrd stated that he was attacked by enemy aircraft that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speed. That sounds kind of like something that the SS had been developing. Subsequently, the modern UFO phenomenon sprang up in 1947, and concentrated disk development programs were initiated in the 50s that have continued to the present day, by the way. They're all called black projects now, and they're operated by the CIA and the NSA and the NRO and NASA and maybe BMW and all these shadow corporations and entities, okay? And so the story of the Third Reich disk programs does not end with the collapse of the Third Reich. It continues unresolved. And even after Admiral Byrd went to resolve it, it was a military blunder that ended in failure. He does not talk about finding a base that he bombed. He does not talk about defeating any force. As a matter of fact, he was defeated. There's so many ways, considering the story that he's told, the story that history tells, to look at this. And we just don't know. But the official story says something about a massive cave, right? The size of an airplane, or the size that an airplane could easily be flown into. Almost without even knowing that you're flying in it, by the way. Just as easily, though, in my opinion, he could have gone through some kind of storm, some kind of cloud cover or darkness that resembled a cave, and maybe ended up somewhere else. He talks about how he goes over a mountain range. Either way, this is where the story now really begins, and you will start to recognize various portions. Because I just don't feel like this story is actually understood by most people, because it's kind of been painted as a fairy tale. So let's break it down a little bit more as we continue. I just told you that after the war, they found all of these thousands of Nazis and Nazi submarines and UFOs and SS and Ukrainians and all these people missing. These are basically the most in-the-know part of the club people. An army of the most capable, and maybe even Hitler himself, right? And they just go missing. After all, one of the theories is that he did escape via submarine, U-boat. But nobody knows where these people are at this time. So Harry Truman gets an idea. He says those assholes are in Antarctica. So off Admiral Byrd goes, and this is where the military operation begins. Again, returning to Rob Arndt's research, while the operation was billed in American newspapers, magazines, and even the occasional newsreel as kind of a mapping expedition, its actual military character is easily seen from a glance based on the composition of this. Commanded by American premier polar explorer Admiral Byrd, the flotilla included an aircraft escort carrier, 2 seaplane carriers, 2 destroyers, 2 escort ships, 2 fueling ships, and a submarine. Additionally, 4,000 troops equipped with helicopters, fixed-wing DC-3s, and a special designed armored track vehicle were also at the Admiral's command. They were outfitted for a stay of 8 months, like we said. The expedition essentially encircled the German-claimed territory of Neu Schwabenland. Admiral Byrd stationed the naval vessels off the coast and then advanced the ground troops and aerial reconnaissance from the pole toward the German territory. Allegedly, the German base was quickly found, overflown, and either an American flag or a bomb, depending on the version of the story, was dropped on that position. In any case, the escort craft accompanying the scout aircraft were lost without a trace. They were lost. The aircraft are just gone. We've never found them. And this single event throws the whole Highjump exercise into a very curious light, doesn't it? Because it somehow changed the whole character of Byrd's expedition. He just that really rubbed him the wrong way for some reason. And within 48 hours, Admiral Byrd gave orders that canceled the entire expedition and made preparations to leave Antarctica immediately. The mission had lasted more like 8 weeks instead of 8 months, and no official reason was given for the sudden withdrawal. The troops didn't know why, but Byrd was returned to Washington, D.C., where he was debriefed, as you are at the end of every mission, and his personal and operational logs from the mission were seized, and they remain classified to this day, which obviously has fueled an endless stream of rumors and conspiracy theories. And a reporter who worked for the Chilean media accompanied Admiral Byrd at one point and said he made some astounding statements, all dutifully recorded. And reported by this man and dutifully ignored by the American press was this news. So, it'd be interesting to go to Chile and see if we could find any documents pertaining to that, wouldn't it? Byrd announced that it is necessary for the United States to put into effect defensive measures against enemy airmen which come from the polar regions. Enemy airmen which come from the polar regions. Admiral Byrd further explained that he did not have the intention to scare anybody, but the reality is that in case of a new war, the United States would be in a position to be attacked by flyers, which could fly with fantastic speed from one pole to the other. This is what he said. Admiral Byrd. Considering the whole background that you were just given, that's what he said. At that time in history, of course, as far as we know, there was only one nation that had undertaken anything like an extensive exploration of the southern polar continent, and that was Nazi Germany. So, either somebody else is there with these devices, Admiral Byrd is lying, maybe to cover up the loss of his planes, or the Nazis actually did develop something insane in Antarctica. Those are the three options, and obviously the easiest to believe is that Admiral Byrd is a liar, but this is a very strange lie to make, especially for an admiral. This is a very strange lie to make. Remember that these Nazi guys were crazy. Like, the SS were crazy. They believed in all kinds of stuff. This was pretty much the whole reason for the war. The Haunebu, who were basically the archaeologist branch of the Nazi party, were out here in Antarctica doing all sorts of weird stuff, and they were all over the place. They went to Iceland, remember, to look for portals and weird stuff like that. I did a documentary about it, and the German pilots extensively photographed many of these regions, including Antarctica. And in Antarctica, they reported mountain ranges in excess of 12,000 feet, rocky crags that projected above the fields of ice, but most amazingly, they allegedly found ice-free ponds that were heated geothermally, in which unknown species of algae were growing. And they also discovered the southern tip of the fault line that runs from New Zealand through Neu Schwabenland, their claimed territory in Antarctica, and up the Atlantic Ocean, the famous Atlantic Trench. The Germans concluded that such features might indicate the presence of rocky caverns in the continent, and that is where they wanted to build a base. They also assumed that this would be heated geothermally. It would be a perfect place for a hidden base because it's in this inhospitable region, but it's heated geothermally if you go inside the Earth. It would be almost impossible for anybody to find them or attack them. Most intriguingly, the scientists aboard the ships that brought everybody there were not idle in analyzing the potential foodstuffs on the continent. They talk about emperor penguins who were captured for return to Germany for study. Walruses were shot and they were dissected. Their bodies were tested for fat, protein, vitamin, and other nutrient content. Their biological findings during this time made Germany pretty confident that they could set up something more permanent here and that they might even be able to use the foodstuffs that are in Antarctica already to survive. Now, clearly, if these allegations are true, then the Germans were preparing to stay here for quite a while. And this is the whole backdrop against which Admiral Byrd has to be placed. Without all the geopolitical tension, the knowledge of the risks and gravity of the mission, the realization that it was considered sort of mysterious even at the time, this is all the Admiral Byrd atmosphere that this story comes from. But he doesn't come back with your typical war stories. He had these 8 months available, but he was forced to withdraw after 8 weeks because of suffering large losses of aircraft. The exact number never made public. What could have possibly happened? He even mentioned at some point when he was talking about these flying devices that could go from one pole to another, that there was an advanced civilization that was working with the SS. He said that, guys. So he goes down there to find the SS, allegedly finds the SS, but it's not the SS that he remembers. It's not the SS he knows. This is a much more advanced version of the SS. And here's the part where everybody gets all warm and fuzzy inside. His journal. Admiral Byrd's peculiar journal, which some say is real, some people say is fake. His own son says it's real. So now maybe his son's a clout chaser. I don't know. We may never know if it's real or not. And even if it is found to be real, they will lie to us and tell us it's not real. But it says that he had somehow, at one point during this operation, traversed through a gateway on his way to wherever the heck he was going. And he mentions crossing a mountain range and entering this land beyond, which was a green valley with rivers flowing through it. And this should be an impossibility, but it does kind of line up with some of this geothermal stuff that the Nazis were talking about. And he even reports seeing mammoths walking around. He says that he initially confused it for an elephant. And they find that the temperature gauges on their aircraft are showing that it's 74 degrees down there. And their gear stops working normally. It makes it impossible for them to report any actual real locational data. That's what he says. And then the aircraft become completely inoperable mid-air as multiple disc-shaped objects appear and commandeer the aircraft from the outside. Now, this reminded me a lot of that Malaysia flight that went missing. The plane that went missing with all those people on it that just went, I can't remember the flight number now, but missing Malaysia flight, whatever. They think that's what happened. Some people think that's what happened there too. These craft appear on the outside and they commandeer the vehicle and they take it. That is what Byrd claims happened. And he said that these craft had some sort of swastika type logo on them. So, a Nordic or Germanic accented voice comes on the radio and tells them to chill out, assuring them that they will land safely, because Admiral Byrd and the crew are just like, holy crap, what's happening? And, you know, the on the radio they say, like, we're gonna land your craft soon. And as they do, tall beings with blonde hair appear as the aircraft lands, and in the distance, a large, shimmering city pulsing with rainbow hues of color. No weapons seen. And the buildings, Byrd says, are made of some kind of crystal designed in a kind of Frank Lloyd Wright design. But the city also has like a Buck Rogers type setting. So it's like really futuristic-y. And they're given a delicious sort of warm beverage that they describe as having a flavor they've never tasted before. And then Byrd is taken, after a series of conversations, he's taken to meet the Master. And he meets this Master in a room filled with pure light. And according to Byrd, he witnesses exquisite, delicate beauty, too great to be described with words. That's the official account in the journal. But nevertheless, Admiral Byrd is welcomed by this Master, this man that he describes as having ancient, delicate features, years emblazoned upon his face, and he is welcomed to this domain and seated at a long table. And the master says, "We've let you enter here because you're a noble character and well known on the surface world." So this place is referred to as Ariani at this time. And the master continues, saying that they began taking an interest in humanity just after humans exploded the first atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He says it was at that alarming time that we sent our flying machines, the Flugelrads. The Flugelrads. Wait a second. The Flugelrads are what the Nazis were calling some of their UFOs. So why is the master of Ariani down here in the inner Earth Kingdom or the beyond Earth Kingdom or wherever the heck he is, why is he talking about having Flugelrods? So did the Nazis have forbidden tech, or is this fake? Because the Nazis also talk about having Flugelrods, but they allegedly sent these Flugelrods to go and investigate the surface world to see what the human race had done. The master says, "That is, of course, past history now, my dear Admiral, but I must continue on." And here's where it gets interesting. The master says, "You see, we've never interfered before in your race's wars and barbarity, but now we must. For you have learned to tamper with a certain power that is not for man, namely that of atomic energy. Our emissaries have already delivered messages to the powers of your world, and yet they do not heed. Now you have been chosen to witness here that our world does exist." He says their race is thousands of years more advanced than the human race. And he says, "Your race has now reached the point of no return. There are those among you who would destroy your very world rather than relinquish their power as they know it. In 1945 and afterward, we tried to contact your race, but our efforts were met with hostility. Our Flugelrods were fired upon." And then he says, "So now I say to you, my son." Okay, my son. "There is a great storm gathering in your world, a black fury that will not spend itself for many years. Something's happening in the future. There will be no answer in your arms, in your weapons. There will be no safety in your science. It may rage on until every flower of your culture is trampled, and all human things are leveled in vast chaos." Now, I'm hearing a couple things. I'm hearing my son, and I'm hearing culture. Byrd then mentions how the Dark Ages came once before, and they lasted more than 500 years. And to me, this was a peculiar thing to say because it reveals that Byrd not only acknowledged the master's words, but also, agrees with the master. Even reinforces and talks to the master like, yes, I'm with you. As a matter of fact, the medieval ages. And the master was basically like, yes. As a matter of fact, according to Admiral Byrd, he says, "My son, the dark ages," again, "my son, the dark ages that will come now for your race will cover the earth like a pall, but I believe that some of your race will live through the storm. Beyond that, I cannot say. We see at a great distance a new world stirring from the ruins of your race, seeking its lost and legendary treasures." Okay, so they've got our treasures because he then says, "They will be here, my son, safe in our keeping." So this master, who calls Admiral Byrd his son, who's concerned about culture, says to Admiral Byrd, "We have all of your treasures, and they're going to be here in our safe keeping." So ask yourself, do angels consider the relics of man worth saving? When angels come to Earth or whatever, when they walk the realms, do they consider the things that mankind have anything worth keeping? Are they anything worth keeping? Or are they just man-made things that glorify man? Are they prideful creations of sin? So it's interesting to hear this guy, this master, say that they're keeping them, because he's also described as a being of light. But in my opinion, if you're a being of light, you're kind of like an angel, right? Like, I could see how some of the ideas are that angels are inside the earth. And him calling the Admiral his son, him being concerned about culture, all that kind of stuff. Now I'm starting to feel like this isn't a very good guy, because you don't hear angels in the Bible talk like that, like they're from an elevated state. They're here to serve mankind, it seems like. Serve God, but also for mankind's glory, inevitably. The Master says, when that time arrives, we will come forward again to help revive your culture and your race. Perhaps by then you'll have learned the futility of war and its strife. Byrd then says that he felt compelled to bow. And this is the final nail in the coffin for me. He said he bowed. He said it felt almost forced, and that he didn't exactly know why. It wasn't clear what emotion it stemmed from, but it felt like respect and humility. All right. So you certainly don't bow to an angel of good. So these beings who are calling Admiral Byrd's son, taking ownership in a fatherly way, encouraging him to bow, being concerned about culture, this, if it is an angel, is a fallen angel, in my opinion. And it's in the earth because he's bound down there. He can't get out. We could look at this guy as a watcher who is fallen, or even a spiritual proxy, maybe. But the question must be asked, if this isn't an angel of good, but he's sitting here talking about reviving humanity and culture, what is this non-human agent showing up to oversee a cosmic battle and then help rebuild it? I'm now thinking that if this is an angel, if this is a watcher, it's not a good one. The beings who appear within the earth to Admiral Byrd are probably not good guys. There is no biblical instance where an angel calls a human son. None. Zero. Angels are not fathers. They do not, or at least they're not supposed to, create, as far as we know. That's why what the Watchers did in Genesis 6 was horrific, creating Nephilim from human women. They weren't just fallen, they were fathers to a counterfeit race. Then these hybrid giants ruled the earth. You guys hear it all the time. They commanded worship, and they corrupted these bloodlines. And if all human bloodlines were tainted, there'd be no clean vessel for the Messiah. So the Watchers tried to install this hybrid royal line, which became a genetic empire of half-divine tyrants. And for thousands of years, many kings and heroes may have carried that bloodline. Imagine the kings of old, and of today, for that matter, being descendants from Nephilim stock. Look at the state of the world, guys. Does it look like we're being headed by beings of light? Now, all the demigod myths begin to make sense, and suddenly you can compare Byrd's story to something like the Lost Library of Alexandria. And here is that strand from Alexander the Great, or the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Alexander the Great claimed to be a god, right? His body has never been found. Perhaps he ascended into the sky, guys, or descended into the earth. Even the ancient Indian texts speak of vimanas, aerial vehicles, and entire flying cities that traverse realms and fire divine weapons. Now look again at the shimmering city that Byrd describes. The master allows him to bow. If the master had said, "Don't bow to me," Byrd would have remembered that, and he would have written it down, like he wrote down everything else, but he didn't. The master says that they are preserving culture and race. Race is self-explanatory, but culture, well, let's talk about that a little bit. What is culture? And I'm not talking about the surface stuff, like flags and food and fashion and clothes, all that kind of stuff, but the ancient seed from which civilization sprouts. The word culture comes from Latin cultus, meaning to till, to cultivate, to honor, to worship. Okay? That's right. Worship. Culture was never about movies or music or memes. It was about land, what you till, ritual, what you practice, and divine order, what you align with. Culture is the ritualization of meaning. Culture. A cult wasn't, now it is, a cult wasn't fringe. It was a foundation. There was the cult of Osiris, which is Egypt's cosmic order. You could even say the cult of Yahweh, Israel's divine law. Now a lot of churches behave much more like, these evil cults than actually people out there to help you too. There was also the cult of Rome, which included Caesar's godhood. Culture is a shared system of reverence rooted in myth, ritual, and memory, not Quentin Tarantino movies. So when the master says he's preserving your culture, that means he's preserving control over your symbols, your worship, your sacred story. We're going right back to what the Watchers installed when they descended on Mount Hermon, aren't we? It's starting to come together how if this is an angelic being in the inner earth, it's not a good one. He wants to make sure that the culture comes back. That's what he's worried. Even today's culture is a hollowed out corpse of these old cults. We've got these rock concerts and these pop concerts replacing fire festivals and rituals. We have political slogans that are being used as like war chants. Fashion equals fertility rights based on what you wear makes you more sexy. We have these celebrities who are most definitely false gods. We have no altar, but we still worship, and we're just not honest about it. Considering this master accepted worship, preserves culture, claims superior knowledge, and spoke of future intervention, I'm getting some red flags. If this story is true, then Admiral Byrd encountered a fallen being. It's a fallen angel, possibly a watcher, possibly something worse, if this actually happened. And if the journal is not true, then it was just written as propaganda to normalize the arrival of false light. The Antichrist will come as the light. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, "For Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." Matthew 24:24, false messiahs will perform signs and wonders to deceive. The Antichrist won't come grotesque or monstrous. He'll arrive shining, comforting, familiar, like a master who wants to preserve your culture. He'll look like salvation. He'll sound like truth, much like the master, but he will invert everything. This mystery master sounds exactly like that to me. The Ariani, which is this realm that Admiral Byrd happened upon, may represent a survivor race of a sort of pre-flood world, a remnant of Atlantean or Lemurian bloodlines, or any of these bloodlines, right? Operating beneath the earth in a separate frequency band. Their message echoes that of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, who once descended to teach, but instead corrupted us all and fathered the Nephilim. Byrd references the Dark Ages, saying they've happened before and lasted 500 years, and the master then agrees, but he also implies another reset is imminent. Very curious as well. And who exactly survives these resets? According to them, they do. The master says some of your race will survive. We see at a great distance. Who decides? Who decides? The master? Or is whoever living going to be the one that the guy that survives and gets to join this next reinvention of mankind and their culture, preserved by these non-human caretakers? This guy spoke like Lucifer, and he moves like a watcher, and he glows like false light. This is a fallen angel, if he ever existed. So, if Byrd's account is true, then it is not evidence of some kind of salvation like a lot of people like to believe in. It's a testament of infiltration. It's not a warning of be careful. It's a warning of, hey, we're coming for you. It's, this guy is a cosmic counterfeit. But this isn't one of those videos where I try to convince you that all the watchers that were chained or whatever are in Antarctica. I haven't done enough research to like really even make any kind of real analysis, even for my own amusement, on that topic. But what I will say is this. Admiral Byrd, as part of a military operation, went to Antarctica with almost 5,000 men. And that's the story he came back with. A highly decorated man of war, research, and intelligence. This is what the result of that journey was. We've all heard the rumors of Nazis in Antarctica, and I don't think it's necessarily coincidental that he mentioned the craft that escorted his own had swastika-type symbols on them, and we have a long history of secret societies within Germany creating the very crafts that he's describing. In 2016, and this is crazy too, Russian scientists found... I'm trying to say this without, like, it just blows my mind. But in 2016, Russians found a Nazi base in Antarctica. In 2016. Like, so, like, if up until, 2016, we're still, like, we haven't found any Nazi bases, allegedly, but then the Russians go and find one, what else is hidden out there? What else did the Nazis have that what hasn't been found in Antarctica? They found this base on Alexandra Land. Interesting name, right? In the Arctic Circle. It was called Schatzgraber, which means treasure hunter. And this is not a conspiracy theory. It is kind of hard to find like more than one account of it, but it's real and there's pictures. Over 500 Nazi artifacts were recovered. Documents marked with swastikas. There was military equipment and relics of a once operational facility, but this was nothing like Base 211. This was not as intense, but it was still said that this base was designed to last quite a while and quite harsh situations, quite harsh environmental conditions. For decades, this specific base was considered little more than a fringe speculation. They didn't believe that it existed. It was a myth. And there were all these UFO theorists and wartime researchers who were like, nah, there's a base there. But the station was never found until 2016. And it was found to be entirely real and hidden beneath snow for 70 years. Officially, Schatzgraber was a weather station. That's the idea, right? Established by the Kriegsmarine, which was the German Navy. It was allegedly found in 1943, and its strategic purpose, according to surface-level history, was to relay Arctic weather data for Nazi U-boat operations in the North Atlantic. But the details raise deeper questions because the station was heavily fortified for long-term survival in one of the harshest climates on Earth. It involved a major logistical operation. U-boats and Condor aircraft transported supplies, equipment, and highly trained personnel to this position. The name treasure hunter alone sounds like like they're doing more than just meteorology, right? They're looking for treasure. That's what it sounds like. That's all you need to really know. The story, though, it gets stranger because in 1944, crew members here fell ill, allegedly, after eating raw polar bear meat, and they contracted something, and the base was evacuated in distress by U-boat. But in hindsight, this illness kind of seems like a cover story, either for an operation gone wrong or to explain the sudden shutdown of a station that may have been doing more than just measuring the wind. It's really hard to know for sure because, again, the world would have us believe, the world that exists now would have us believe that this was just a fringe idea of conspiracy theorists. And those types of ideas just seem to be getting proven true time and time again these days, right? But pause and consider this. Schatzgraber wasn't rediscovered until 2016. That means that for decades, the world had no physical evidence that this installation ever existed. And this wasn't even one of the most secret locations to have allegedly existed. If this one station lay buried and unknown for so long, and it's not even base 211, how many others remain hidden under the snow, the ice, or just classified documentation? Besides 211 and Schatzgraber, there are a number of other bases that have not been discovered that allegedly exist, Nazi bases in Antarctica, including there's this supposed ice fortress that is located beneath Lake Vostok, which is a massive subglacial freshwater lake hidden under 2 miles of ice. Satellite imaging and ice-penetrating radar revealed geometric structures near the lake, and some say these are ancient ruins, while others say that they're linked to Nazi expeditions. Russia, which operates a research station above Lake Vostok, has been extremely secretive about what it has found there, fueling theories that something ancient or forbidden could lie beneath the ice there. There's also Neu Berlin, which is an Antarctic Nazi breakaway colony. It's a post-World War II secret colony that was created by high-ranking Nazis who escaped justice by fleeing to Antarctica with stolen wealth, scientists, and advanced tech. And they say that happened to Argentina as well. But since they had the route from Antarctica to South America, there's nothing saying that a quick stopover in Antarctica before heading to the true destination, Argentina, wasn't something that may have happened. So similar to those rat lines that helped so many Nazis escape to South America, this theory claims that they left civilization altogether, retreating into some kind of hidden, self-sustaining outpost. So if there is a fallen angel sect or group within the earth down here, and all of these Nazis also came to Antarctica, and these hidden beings seem to have some kind of Nazi tech or symbology going on down here still, did the Master and the Ariani absorb the German people? Or again, is all of that just made up? All of this is all kind of like tied into the Fourth Reich concept. It's just like an invisible empire that survived the war underground and now infiltrates like global finance, tech, and geopolitics, all that kind of stuff. There's also this really weird one called the Black Sun Polar Temple, and this is mentioned in various fringe documents in esoteric circles, but this structure is believed to house the Black Sun cult, which was a secret Nazi sect that worshipped an ancient celestial force that was tied to Saturn and abyssal time and like metaphysical darkness, basically. And it ties with the Welsberg Castle in Germany and the SS ritual site, which contained a black sun mosaic on the floor, if you guys have seen that. And that this Black Sun Polar Temple was essentially a place of ritual, a kind of Hyperborean axis mundi where the spiritual elite could commune with powers from beyond time and space. But as we all know, after the war, weird stuff just started happening all around Antarctica, and that includes some of these rumors. Not everything is true, contrary to what some of these conspiracy theorists will tell you. Germany may have seen Antarctica not just as a resource frontier, but as an actual hidden realm of power. Now, I know we've been here a while. We've been talking about this for a while now, but bear with me. We're almost done here because this is where it starts to get relevant in the modern age a little bit more. After World War II and facing escalating Cold War tensions and possible resource grabs, 12 nations convened in Washington, D.C., and signed the landmark Antarctic Treaty, which basically is the treaty that everybody talks about that says, you know, we can't do this in Antarctica, we can't do that in Antarctica, nobody can live here permanently, nobody can fight wars here or use it for war reasons or any of that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what Article 1 of this treaty says that Antarctica shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. Scientific collaboration was also prioritized with the continuing of international geophysical cooperation. And then there was also all territory claims that anybody had made prior to now were suspended. So no new land grabs were allowed, and all that land that people thought they were grabbing, you're not grabbing it, okay? It's all part of this agreement that the entire world basically agreed to freeze Antarctica's status, pardon the pun. But there have been a number of nations, including China, Russia, and America, who have established bases in Antarctica without help from each other. Like, they independently do them. A lot of those bases are not just used for, it seems, not just used for scientific purposes, but also for warfighting capabilities, radar, and all that kind of stuff. But I bet you never considered that there's an ending to this treaty in 2048. And that's where it gets really spicy for the future, because there's a clause within the Madrid Protocol of this Antarctic treaty, and it marks a critical inflection point in global geopolitics. And it's cloaked in this language of sort of like environmental stewardship, and we've got to take care of the land. But here's what it says, and it might not mean what you think. When the Protocol of Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty was adopted in 1991 and enforced in 1998, it banned all mineral resource activity in Antarctica for at least 50 years. This means that in the year 2048, any consultative party to the treaty, any of them, Russia, China, they can request a review of the protocol's ban on mining and mineral exploitation. But this isn't just a majority vote type deal. To lift the ban, the decision must pass a majority of all signatory nations, a 3/4 vote of consultative parties, and a unanimous agreement from all original signers of the treaty. In theory, that's a high bar to clear, but the strategic behavior of world powers in Antarctica right now suggests they're already preparing for this, whether or not the treaty is officially revised. So, in other words, by 2048, the treaty could literally be dissolved, but if it's not, these nations are establishing bases that appear militarily capable in Antarctica anyway. And with all of the tensions heating up in the world these days, this might not be the most critical alliance to maintain in those times. And there's all sorts of military operations like Operation Deep Freeze and all these other ones that nations have done in Antarctica that are highly questionable and secretive. Which brings us to this final conclusion that, there's clearly a mission for Antarctica. And obviously it's a strategic location, so that's one reason that you could say, well, that's why they have all these military capabilities. It could also be to defend assets that they find in Antarctica. It doesn't have to just be like, we're going to use this as a place to mount an invasion from, or we're going to use this place as a place to plant radars, although they are definitely doing that. Think about it from the perspective of they might be claiming Antarctica because there's something there that they're not willing to give up. Some kind of super mineral, some kind of technology that hasn't been found yet, or some kind of technology that has been found and needs to be kept hidden and defended, if possible. An Antarctic war, if you will. So, listen, guys. I understand this episode was a little bit longer, and I'm sorry if it was a little bit monotonous for you guys who can't handle history. But thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for sticking around if you did. Try to get some good sleep tonight. You're going to need it. Don't drink the water. Question everything. Later.